Well, we actually have a big announcement. Welcome to the Bars Ankle High, your weekly ADHD podcast that explores life's slow bars with wit and wisdom. I'm Katie,
I'm Garrett.
and this is episode 80, which means we have a really fun announcement.
We do. We do have a really fun announcement.
So, you, of course, already have your Garrett Birdsona pin, and you, of course, already have your Katie Birdsona pin, which,
How could you
by the
not?
way, yeah, both available at bit.ly/ankle-high-merch. However, now we have an unpaid intern Birdsona that
I'm
you can
so
get.
excited.
It's in our merch store as you're hearing this episode. So again, bit.ly/ankle-high-merch, and you can get an unpaid intern pin and potentially some other things. So I'm trying to figure out as we're recording how I can like get the image onto something with like I can do all things through my unpaid intern who edits me.
I love it so much. I think I'm gonna I'm gonna do a little print of mine and a little print of his for the baby's room and put them in like a
Oh
little
my
frame
god.
together
That'll
because
be
it's
so
just
cute.
they're so great. They came out so amazing
Yeah.
and it just like completes it for me. It's
Yeah.
just like so complete now. Having
Yes.
all three. I just love it.
Yeah, it makes me really happy. I just think and the artist that did that for us is Allison Dubois. She's based out of California, and she will tag her when we post it on our Instagram as well. So if you want Birdsona, she does like custom commissions and everything, but she was also the head art director on Tuca and Birdie
Mhm,
and BoJack Horseman, I
mhm.
think as well. So she's got the chops and she just like
Amazing.
nails it every time, and it's just
Yes.
it like when we got the email with it, PK and I were cackling like absolutely
I
because
think
the
I
bird
screamed.
looks so unimpressed.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Which is how your spouse looks at me a lot of the time when I
Same.
say something unhinged.
Kinda like when I'm trying to set up a camera and he's watching me, which, by the way, it went fine, okay?
Yeah,
It
easy
was
peasy.
fine. I didn't make any mistakes. I was just struggling with this telescoping stand.
Okay. So just the telescopes is struggling.
Just
But
it's just the collapsible thing that was
in your defense, he's the one that wants a telescope for Father's Day, not you.
yeah, not me. Even though he hates space, I don't he's an enigma. That's what he is.
Yeah. But now he's a Birdsona.
Now he's an
So
emu. I feel like important context to this is uh the irony that it's a birdsona and my spouse hates birds.
yes. Really anything with wings,
Yeah, it
he's
doesn't like
really
butterflies
anti.
either.
Yeah.
Um, but he also really hates specifically like birds, subset emus and ostriches, or like
Yes.
very big birds. Um, he really specifically hates those a lot. He also has that megalophobia,
What's that?
like the fear of like big things, like the Macy's Day Parade, like the big parade floats and
Oh.
um
So anything that's like bigger than it should be. So like an
yeah,
oversized Adirondack chair just like sends him over the edge.
maybe.
Hmm.
I don't know. We're gonna have to. I mean, we'll find out when he. I'm sure he'll edit it and he'll turn to me and be like, "Actually, um, I know. Like, we went to when we were in Scotland, we went to the Kelpies,
Oh yeah.
those giant horse heads, and he was like, not loving it. I thought it was great.
They don't move though.
No, they don't move. It doesn't matter if they move. They're just
Okay.
big. Or that Rio de Janeiro, the Jesus
Yeah.
on the mountain.
Mhm.
Um, That's another one that he's like, "Ugh." So,
Huh.
anyway, I just
Do
think
all
it's
statues cause problems or just big ones?
I don't know. I
Like the
think just
Statue of
big ones.
Liberty
I
is
think just, like, things that are gigantic and aren't
I
supposed to.
mean, the Statue of Liberty, though, can come to life. Ghostbusters proved that. There's a reason to be
True.
afraid of the Statue of Liberty and the Stay Puft Marshmallow guy. So,
It's true. Those are very legitimate fears to have. Side note, this is not important to anything, and it's just like a very funny exchange. But um, so we put wallpaper up in the baby's closet.
yes.
So it's like 10 o'clock at night. The two of us are sitting there trying to figure out how to line up this fucking wallpaper that had a really like in the reviews when I went back and looked, somebody was like, it's impossible to line this up to get it to match.
Oops.
Didn't see that.
I hate when I see those reviews after the fact.
Something about ADHD. So we're like, we're both like exhausted trying to figure out how to hang this fucking wallpaper in this very narrow closet. Like you can't turn your shoulders. It was just like all of the possible ADHD things that could be like a problem were a problem.
Mhm.
So I said to him, I go, hey, why don't you ask your mom has a lot of experience hanging wallpaper. So why don't you ask your mom to come look at this? Because maybe she'll be able to see something that we're not seeing.
Yeah.
So my mother-in-law comes and looks at it and she walks in and she goes, where's the baby? And the two of us were like, she's in bed. The vacuum sitting there, my spouse goes, we sucked, she's in the vacuum cleaner. We sucked her up with the vacuum cleaner. I was like, yeah, like Casper. So again, not relevant to anything, but it just made me think about Casper and sucking him up with a vacuum
I
cleaner.
love that also that's the first thing she says when she walks into the room.
Yeah.
Like, "Where's the baby?" She's working. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
she pulls overnights because we work during the day.
We were
That's
like, what? She goes, well, she was so concerned. And it was one of those like, are these guys, have they lost it? Did they forget they had a baby?
You're leaving out the part where, like, you both have wallpaper just, like, plastered around you. It's in your hair.
Actually, the other
So the
ADHD,
reason that she was asking about the
yeah,
welfare of your
we
child.
looked bad. 10 o'clock at night hanging wallpaper. I attempted to hang it by myself during the day. And it's
Mhm.
just like shitty like peel and stick.
Yeah, I would have done that too.
So yeah. So I was like, how hard is it really gonna be? I'm just gonna like I'll get the top and then I'll just smooth it down as I go and it'll be fine.
Right.
Um as it turns out, I bought very cheap, thin peel and stick wallpaper. Um and it was impossible. And I thought I tore all the backing off and I was like doing it as I went, but I couldn't reach all the way to the top. And then I realized that when I was ripping the backing off, I didn't rip all of the backing off and there was a strip. So it got to the point where it was so mangled and stuck to itself that we literally had to throw away the giant strip that I used. So, if anybody's thinking about, and it's funny because I've sworn for literally a decade, I will never put wallpaper up. I've taken so much wallpaper down. I'll never fucking do it. I hate wallpaper. But then I saw this picture online. I was like, well, now I have to wallpaper. So, it's a
Yeah.
two-person job for anybody with ADHD who is thinking about hanging wallpaper. Wait until you have help.
Um, yeah.
Don't be like me
Or Coco, who's having a conniption at the moment.
or
Sorry
Coco.
about that, folks. Coco, shut up! I'm guessing that PK just left to go grocery shopping.
I love that when somebody else goes.
Yeah.
I hate grocery shopping.
Yeah. We're oh, it doesn't matter. Uh,
Do we have any other housekeeping? 15 minutes later.
uh
Sorry.
extended cut. No.
Okay. Should we jump into it?
Yeah, what are we talking about today? Because I didn't do any work.
So,
So
um, So today we are going to talk about postpartum psychosis, and I feel like there should probably be a trigger warning at the beginning of this. It's like kind of a heavy topic, sad, the whole nine.
Trigger warning for what? Just that it's sad?
Um, I mean, it's a heavy topic, but there's talk of suicide, of you know violence against children. It's just like it's a heavy one.
Okay.
Um, so postpartum psychosis, obviously this will probably be like one of the last ones, at least for a while, in our postpartum like series that we've done. So we've talked about postpartum anxiety, where you have the anxious or worried feelings that are just like excessive and overwhelming, and it impacts your ability to be able to really function.
Mhm.
We've talked about baby blues, which is super common. It happens like, I don't know, like 85-90% of people who give birth, where you just have like very strong emotions and emotional behavior. You're anxious and sad and overwhelmed and maybe very weepy and um, maybe having trouble sleeping, but that's like a short term, doesn't last more than, maybe a week or two, and then you kind of balance out and it settles. We also talked about postpartum depression. Um, so it's similar to that baby blues, but stronger, longer lasting, um, and it can really interfere with your ability to bond with your baby and affects about 1 out of every 7 people. So it's pretty common. Um, there's a very strong link between the postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety. Um, Postpartum psychosis, however, it would be the most severe of all of these, and it goes beyond just like mood changes. It really is it's a psychosis, so it disrupts your sense of reality. Um, and really needs to be treated as like a medical emergency. Like that's the seriousness of the diagnosis.
Hmm.
Um,
So, once you're diagnosed, is that, like, significant intervention time? Like, do you go like, are you on, like, a 72-hour hold
So
or
we will talk about it.
okay.
And yes, it's one of those like once it's caught, it's professionals need to be involved. This is not something like, hey, we'll medicate you and send you home.
Okay.
Um, so this is estimated to impact like about 1 in 2 in every 1,000 people giving birth. So
Okay.
it's not super common. It is more rare. Um, you figure in the United States that averages about just under 5,000 births a year globally. Obviously, it's a lot higher. We're looking at 12 million um, instances a year. So because it disrupts that sense of reality, and your ability to kind of determine what's real and what's not, there's a lot of times where the person with the psychosis doesn't they're not aware that they even have a medical issue going on.
Mhm.
Um,
Right, yeah.
and it's not something that you can really be managing on your own, and it's very rare that people even super early on can recognize the symptoms and catch it in themselves. So it's really up to people around them to be aware of the symptoms and, act on that to make sure that this person gets care. So symptoms can start really suddenly. So I guess this whole topic kind of like threw me for a loop. I thought that this was like something where, oh, you wind up with postpartum depression, and then if it goes really bad and untreated, you wind up with psychosis. That
Okay.
is not what this is.
Oh, okay.
So it starts suddenly, usually within the first 2 weeks after giving birth, but it can happen within hours or days.
Jesus Christ. That's
Wild.
terrifying.
Yeah.
That's like something out of like a Bloom House or like uh the what's it, A21 or something, like those like indie horror films where it's
Mm.
like they're so silent, like there's no
Yeah.
soundtrack, so you're just watching it happen and it's like
Listening to yourself
horrifying.
breathe. Yeah.
Yes.
Um,
Jesus Christ.
More rarely, it's
Hours.
saying it can develop up to 6 weeks after birth. It gets worse rapidly, and it really is one of those, like, immediately risks the safety of the mother and the baby, or the parent and the baby.
Huh.
Um, People with postpartum psychosis have a much higher risk of harming themselves, dying by suicide, or harming the children. Um, so they break the symptoms down into like three different types. It's almost like three different categorizations of postpartum psychosis.
Okay.
Um, the first subtype is the depressive, which is the most common type. It makes up about 41% of the cases, and it's also the most dangerous. Um, so the depressive symptoms and psychosis are almost always a factor in the cases where there's self-harm to the parent or harm to the child, especially in situations where there's hallucinations or delusions. The rate of harm to the child is about 4.5% within that subtype. So it's about 4 to 5 times more prevalent than the other subtypes.
Oh, okay.
And the rate
So
of
the other subtypes don't have harm to the children?
They can, but it's the most common with this depressive subtype.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
and the rate
I
of
think
dying
because
by
you
suicide.
said it was like 4.5% and then 4 to 5 times more likely, I, like,
It wasn't
mixed.
a great the phrasing's not great, I'll be honest. I
I
would have
feel
had
like
the
that
same
was on me.
problem.
I was not listening carefully. I'm listening, I just, like, I don't know, didn't digest it in separate thoughts.
I just love that, like, people that listen to this podcast are like, "Oh, an ADHD podcast," but they get to hear it in real time. It's not just like, "Oh, we're both medicated and it's really well managed and we only record in the best of circumstances." No, there's some days where we're, like, skidding across the finish line and we're a fucking wreck.
I still die at that time where I was like, "Hey, could you say that again? I didn't hear you." I've got headphones on, like, there's no excuse. Nope.
I'm sitting in front of a
Just
screen looking at you, or sitting next to you looking at you with headphones. Like, there's no reason I shouldn't be hearing you.
yeah, no, because I look at my phone and
You
there
know
you
what the
go.
problem is? There's a brain that's in between the headphones that doesn't always work. And then
Short
you
circuits.
yes, you add in, like, sleep deprivation, hangovers, things like that, and
La
everybody
la
gets
la.
a real sense of what ADHD is like. Um, do you have another thought?
Mm, I don't know.
And scene. That was great. Do you have another thought? I don't know. Um, so this depressive subset, the symptoms that come with this: anxiety or panic, delusions where you have these false beliefs that you're holding on to, um, where the beliefs are so strong that even if somebody's like preventing you, presenting you with logical evidence, it doesn't matter because
Mhm.
the evidence isn't true.
Right.
Um, so believing somebody's out to get you, or somebody's controlling your body, or that I didn't have a child, I wasn't pregnant. Um, you can have hallucinations where you're hearing, seeing, smelling, feeling things that aren't there, and you can't tell the difference between like what's really happening and what's a hallucination. Um, Having depressive symptoms where you're withdrawn or tearful, or lacking energy, agitation, trouble sleeping, feelings of guilt, loss of appetite. Some people describe having like they call it depersonalization, where you feel like you're having an out of body experience almost. Um, Having
I don't
your
want this.
It's awful,
Return to sender. Like,
awful.
this sounds horrible.
Yes, and I think the most frightening thing is, like, the fact that because it's a psychosis, not realizing that it's happening.
I think that's the scariest part to me. Like, that's what
Yeah,
always, like, trips me out about, um, like, bipolar disorder or,
right,
dissociative identity disorder, like, where you don't know that you're,
in a state.
yeah, that you're not
Yeah,
yourself or who you used to be, like, that is always so it's like one of those, like, anxiety dreams that you have where it's like, I'm trying to run, but I can't
All
or
my teeth have
whatever.
fallen out, yeah.
Yeah, like, one of those things where, like, you just have no control over your body whatsoever, and, like, to not know that you have no control over your body,
Yeah,
it's like The Last of Us.
yeah.
There's just, like, a little
You're a
clicker
clicker,
thing
and you
in
don't
your
even know you're a
brain.
clicker.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really frightening. And obviously there's, thoughts of self-harm, suicide, harming the child. Yeah, it's a very scary thing. Some of these symptoms are really frightening. The other subset is the manic type of postpartum psychosis. It's the next most common. It affects about 34% of cases. The risk of self harm or harm to the child is lower, but still possible. It happens about 1% of the time. So you really think about, like, you know, when you hear about it in the news, which I'll talk about a couple like big cases, but um, you think about how uncommon this psychosis is to begin with, and then the fact that like only a few percent of that small number are actually getting to the point of harm.
Mhm.
Um,
Which is really when it makes the news anyway. So, like,
right,
it's the problem that anybody with, like, a rare disease has is that, nobody pays attention to it because it's rare. Not
right.
that I would say that this is particularly rare. I mean, 5,000 cases a year
It's
in the
enough
US.
that, something that we rail about a lot is if it happened to men at this level of frequency, we would
Mhm.
know a lot more about it.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. And yeah, it's that kind of thing too where, like, I I I think that at least in the US, we're getting better at accepting postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety as, like, realities,
for sure. Yeah.
but if the only time we ever hear about postpartum psychosis is when there's harm to somebody themselves or to their child or their family,
We're failing
then
people.
well, we're failing people, but it's also that sort of thing where it's like, maybe you have a moment of lucidity and you're like, "I think I might have postpartum psychosis." But I haven't killed anybody or tried to hurt myself, so I can't have that. Like, if that's the only time you hear about it, it's like if you only ever heard
Right.
about cancer when people died from it,
Right.
then you'd
And they only
think
died like 1% of the time.
right, then you would
Yeah.
think like, "Well, I can't have cancer because I'm not dying."
Hmm.
That's
Well, and
not
I
always the
mean,
case.
we talked about how people have a really hard time seeking help for something like postpartum depression, which is
Yeah.
so common, um, that you see something like this, which is so much less common and so much more dangerous and so much more severe. Like, and I'll get into a little bit of that, but it's if you're having thoughts of like harming your baby, like you wouldn't want to tell somebody that.
No, because I'd be afraid you'd take
You're
my kid from me.
horrified,
Yeah.
right, and you're afraid that you're gonna lose custody, like, just the chain reaction of things, when in reality, like, oh, this could be something much more insidious than just an intrusive thought. Um,
So what's the difference between a depressive episode and a manic episode?
so when you're having a manic psychosis, you're having, like, that high feeling. So you're like overactive, restless, you're losing those normal like inhibitions you have, you're agitated, like disruptive or aggressive, talking a lot or like really fast,
Mm.
or both, needing less sleep or dealing with like an insomnia where you can't sleep. And also those delusions, but they tend to be instead of like maybe a paranoid delusion, it's more of delusions of greatness or importance, like thinking that your child is like the second coming type of
Oh.
delusions. Um, so it is very much like a mania psychosis that you would have probably like with a bipolar episode.
Mhm.
Um, and then there is an atypical set of symptoms, which makes up about 25% of cases. So it can be a mix, of the two of the manic and the depressive, but it can also create symptoms where somebody's much more detached from reality, much more less aware of what's going on in the world around them. So disorganized speaking or behavior, a mix of a manic mood and a low mood, or like very changeable moods, being disoriented and confused. Um, there's a disturbance of consciousness, they were calling it. So where they don't appear to be awake, or they're not aware of activities or like things happening around them, the hallucinations and delusions, inappropriate comments, behaviors, or emotional displays, or like a being like catatonic. So
Oh,
it's
okay.
really, I mean, like overall, very frightening symptoms to be displaying for sure.
Yeah. I don't like
Um,
any of them.
no, there was a quote from a perinatal psychologist. They said, often in postpartum psychosis, women have delusional thoughts, but they're very quiet about it. So they're often not sharing what they're thinking, so family doesn't necessarily know. Sometimes you see a change in functioning. People can get very withdrawn. Their thinking may look strange. They may not be themselves, but you have no idea what else is going on because it can happen so suddenly. And that's what makes it so potentially difficult to intervene quickly. Um, as far as causes go, you're gonna hate this information. It can happen
Hangovers.
drinking red wine long before you get pregnant, unfortunately.
If you've ever had red wine.
If you've literally ever had red wine, if you've ever been to church and had red wine. Um, so it can happen to anyone who gives birth. The odds of having it are higher for people with certain mental health conditions, but they don't really know if the conditions contribute or cause it. They just know that there's a link. Fun. Um, so
I
if
mean, why
you
would we answer such a question?
it's only killing women and children.
I mean,
We can get to that later. Um, if you already have a diagnosis of bipolar or schizophrenia, um, and about 1/3 of people with postpartum psychosis have a previously diagnosed mental health condition, which
any
means that
mental health condition?
2/3 don't. That it just said mental health condition. So, I mean, if I had to guess, I would assume something like, a history of depression. It does specifically link or state bipolar and schizophrenia. But I'm assuming like any type of depressive, manic, or history of psychosis are probably going to make you, I mean, talking out of my booty, are going to make you more susceptible to this.
Jeez.
Yeah. Having a family history of mental illness, particularly postpartum psychosis, even if you personally don't have a history of it. If you've developed postpartum psychosis after a previous pregnancy, it is more common in people who just gave birth to their first child. But if you have a history, there's a 30 to 50% chance that you'll have it again with future
I
births.
don't know that I would be going with a second pregnancy if I had it the first time, I'll be honest.
Very scary.
Yeah.
And we'll talk
Yeah,
about like
like
what recovery looks like too, but
like
scary.
yeah, like a from a true fear perspective,
Mhm.
like I don't know, like it's that sort of thing where, if you've had like a complicated birth or a complicated pregnancy, then you have to like assess those factors before you decide to get pregnant again.
Right, like you're already weighing, okay,
Right.
can I get through the newborn phase again? Can I get through a pregnancy again? Like, what is labor and delivery going to look like? Do I need to find a new practitioner because I had a really bad time, the first
Right.
run, or did I have preeclampsia? I mean, there's just like so many like big, scary unknowns going into a pregnancy that
Yeah, to add this in, like, well, I had it
right,
before, so now there's a 50 plus chance
right,
percent chance that I'm gonna do it again, like, and that was really shitty and, like, almost cost me my marriage, or, like, I almost lost my job because I had this or whatever,
right.
like, I don't
And that's
know, like
just and ju I mean, those things can happen from postpartum depression. This
right,
could I lose touch with fucking reality? I mean, that is
right.
it's just such a big, scary thing. It's just like, I don't it blew my mind, this whole
And
thing.
I feel like as a just, like, from a partner perspective, there's also that question of, like, could I put my partner through that again?
Yeah.
Whereas, like, if it's
Do I have the support systems that can chip in and help them if I'm
correct.
inpatient
Yeah. Like, how
voice?
is like, if I had this, like, how would PK manage
Mhm.
helping like, being my support system while I'm trying to get better, but, like, then to ask him to do all that again or to potentially have to do all that again, like, that's I don't know that I'd be asking him to do that.
And then, like, also keeping, like, a household running
Yeah, which,
and
like, no judgment to anybody who's listening if you've had this and
oh,
gotten pregnant
no. I
again, like,
mean,
I'm not ju
it's
I'm it's just it's such a factor in a subsequent
it's a
pregnancy, like
very individual decision.
yeah.
Um, other contributing factors they talk about are sleep deprivation, and they know that,
Oh,
like
good. The thing that people with newborns don't have.
truly.
Jesus
And we've
Christ.
talked about this before, like, when we were talking about
Also,
sleep.
breathing oxygen.
Yes.
Like,
Blinking can also contribute.
if you blink more than 30 times in a minute
You're toast. And we talked about this before, like, when we were talking postpartum stuff, when we were talking about, um, sleep deprivation, and I was joking, like, they use it as a form of torture.
yeah,
So, um and I think we also had a conversation at one point about houselessness and, people who are maybe in that state because of a mental health condition,
yeah,
then are not getting sleep and they're sleep
right.
deprived. And how that's just going to worsen it. So it just turns into this like cycle. This is
Yes.
the same thing. Like you look at something like bipolar disorder where not getting enough sleep can trigger mania, and then you're going to be manic and not be able to sleep, so you're in this like loop where you're not getting better. They also suspect that not sleeping can be a part of the development of this postpartum psychosis. um Obviously we have discussed hormone changes. um
Yep.
we've covered in previous postpartum episodes that in the 24 hours after birth your estrogen returns to pre-pregnancy levels, which is something that should be illegal. um
I mean,
it
honestly, I don't know
happens.
how our species has lasted this long.
Yeah.
I don't get it.
Um, so the explanation that this article gave was obviously, your body chemistry is undergoing like huge changes going through your period, getting pregnant, postpartum, evening out after the fact, breastfeeding or chest feeding or pumping, like however it is. Um, Even if you're not doing that, you're still going to have the generation of the prolactin that's released and all of that. So this says that they suspect specifically estrogen and prolactin. Prolactin is the what's associated with lactation, can play a role. But again, more research has to be done
I
because
mean,
we don't know
don't
shit
they
about
also
hormones.
say something about how, like, if you ever have been pregnant, whether you breastfeed or not, your likelihood of developing breast cancer, like, skyrockets
Yeah,
compared to
because
somebody
like
who hasn't had a
you're
baby
I don't know
or
about that specifically, but like even if you're not choosing to have like an extended period of lactation where you're chest feeding or pumping, your milk is still going to come in.
right.
So it's
Yeah,
like
like,
an
you don't have a
unavoidable,
choice.
right? Like I think there is like a drug that they can give you to like stop it, but it's still going to come in.
Right.
So it's one of those like they're like, "Oh, well, your hormones can contribute to it." Your hormones are going to change no matter what.
Well, yeah, like, that so it's like that statistic in regarding, like, breast cancer, um, like, just always irked me because it's like, don't tell me something that, like, I can't change.
Right.
Like, I
Also,
like, okay, so then existing as a female, I'm more likely to have breast cancer than if I was existing as a male. So,
and they're like,
okay.
"Yup."
Like, just put it
That's it.
that way. Like, what's it have to do with, like, my procreation rate?
Right.
Like, it whatever. So, anyway, but it would track that it's tied to prolactin if it's the prolactin that's causing an uptick in breast cancer. Like, as we've learned, hormones don't do just one thing, God forbid. So,
No, that one explanation, remember it said something like hormones regulate every organ in the body, which I thought was
yeah.
like a really, when you put it that way, you're like, oh, it like affects literally every single function that your body has is impacted by hormones.
Yeah.
I should have just muted myself when I did that, but too late
Nah.
now.
At least you didn't smack yourself in the face with your headphones again.
Oh my God. It was like hard too. Oh God. They're also stating that that the psychosis can, I'm so sorry. That the psychosis can also happen for medical reasons. Um so they're saying like, something like an autoimmune or inflammatory disease, electrolyte imbalances, vitamin deficiencies, thyroid disorders, stroke, preeclampsia can be like contributing conditions. I know like
What the fuck?
we did talk about,
So
I'm
I
just
was
going to
right about
speak.
the blinking.
I knew it. We did talk about in postpartum depression how like a thyroid, if you have like hypothyroidism, which your thyroid can be disrupted after having a baby, um that can represent, the symptoms of that can mimic a depression, like a postpartum depression. Um but that's all I can really speak to on that, because I was like, that's a lot of things to list, you know?
It's feeling very kitchen sinky.
Yeah, it's feeling almost like when we did ODD and they were like, I don't know, it's all these things.
Yes.
Like
But
I feel like Goofy's delivering this information to me like, well,
yes,
I
good.
don't know. Yeah. Good question beats me. Like, Goofy, you're not helping anybody
um
by just listing things off.
yeah, like I think it goes to show what you said earlier that, if this was happening to men, we would know. And this would probably be a much more narrow list,
Yes.
and they wouldn't be using this like broad brush to be like, well, if you've ever had boobs and if you've ever been pregnant and if you've ever had hormones, then maybe you'll have this. Like, Jesus fucking Christ.
Yes. It's every time we research something like this, it's just exasperating because you're like, what do you mean you don't know more? What do you mean you haven't researched this?
Yeah.
Um,
It's like, especially when it comes to protecting life. Like,
yeah, because that's a crock of bullshit.
like it's just one of those things. Like, this is an easy win for everybody on both, both sides to say, like, okay, we need to figure out why, you know, the early childhood stage and like infancy is so high risk. Like, we need to have the answer and we need to solve the problem once we have the answer. And it's just like, what if you just went back to work after a week instead?
Yeah, have you considered working from the hospital? I mean, I just feel like that would be seamless. Then we don't have to worry about all this nonsense.
Right.
Um, so postpartum psychosis is treatable. Um, but again, because it's a rare condition, there is limited available research on how to treat it.
That's what
Yeah.
I think of that.
So treatment usually happens in a hospital. This is one of those things because it is a medical emergency. It needs to be treated by professionals. So ideally, you're inpatient in a specific psychiatric unit with your baby. I don't think that that's always going to be an option.
Yeah.
Let me correct that. It's definitely not going to always be on the table for people.
Yeah.
Um, But you
But it
can make a full recovery as long as you receive the right treatment
yeah,
for
and both
you.
of those options make sense, having your baby with you
Mhm.
and also not having access to your baby. Like, both I can see how both of the like, it would
Right.
be very case dependent, and also, whether where you're staying can guarantee both of your safeties,
Yes.
which oftentimes comes down to staffing and available, um, expertise, because the needs of an infant are very different than the needs of an adult.
Yes.
Um, but I yeah, that would be tough because I could see it being that thing of like, if you don't let me near my baby, I will do something drastic.
Right.
But
Because
I could
what a
also see my partner being like, you are not allowed near the baby until you're cool.
right, like, we need to
So,
stabilize before we can
yeah.
approach that. I know, like, I was reading on Reddit actually recently, and I just happened upon it, but this woman was talking about how she was getting ready to go inpatient for postpartum psychosis, and was asking people about the ability to pump. And a lot of people were saying, like, yeah, I had a pump that I was able to like lock up in a fridge and this, but they said that ultimately they wound up like pumping and dumping because the drugs they were being given, they were just like not 100% sure. Like, nobody, it's one of those, like, nobody can really answer the question, like,
Mm,
is this safe while you're breastfeeding? So a lot of people were pumping and dumping, but at least like there was enough infrastructure and understanding to know that, okay, like, this is something that we need to have available to people who are recovering from this.
yeah.
From a medicinal standpoint, they tend to prescribe one or more of antipsychotics, mood stablers, and antidepressants. So the antipsychotics are going to help with those manic symptoms, especially like delusions and hallucinations. Mood stabilizers will help keep you even and prevent symptoms from reoccurring.
Mhm.
And then antidepressants are going to help ease those significant depressive symptoms. And a lot of times are used along with the mood stabilizer to kind of get you even.
Mhm.
Um, they use electroconvulsive therapy as well to treat this. And I know we talked about it with, was it depression that we talked about? I think it was.
Yes. 'Cause I was dumbfounded that that was still a thing. I didn't
Yeah.
know.
Um, and just to like touch back on that, it's safe, highly effective. They use a mild electrical current. You're under general anesthesia. That current passes through your brain to induce a mild seizure. Um, and that seizure can then cause changes of brain activity and
Mhm.
can sometimes reduce the severity of something like postpartum psychosis. Um, and because you're under general anesthesia, you're not feeling pain or discomfort or anything like they show in movies.
Mhm.
Um, and then they also remind people that as you're moving forward with this recovery, to probably be seeing a therapist, because getting into some kind of cognitive behavioral therapy is going to be really crucial for people. Um, the timeline for recovery is broad. It seems like
Okay.
it's a very individual thing. The most severe symptoms last anywhere from 2 to 12 weeks, and it can take 6 to 12 months or more to recover completely from the condition. um, but with the right treatment and right support, most people do make a full recovery.
Mhm.
Um, they said that when there's an episode of postpartum psychosis, it's not unusual to be followed by a period of depression, anxiety, sometimes low confidence. And sometimes it takes a while for people, when they've kind of come back down to ground, to come to terms
Mhm.
with what happened. I mean, you think about it, like, people have a hard time, postpartum depression can be triggered by your birth not going the way you were planning.
Right.
So let's say your birth doesn't go the way it was planned, and then you also wind up with postpartum psychosis. There's gonna be a lot of coping that's gonna come, processing that's gonna come after the fact. kind of reconciling that things really did not go the way you were planning on. Um, and with something like this, with an episode like this, a lot of mothers can have, or parents can have difficulty bonding with the baby. Um, but they do say that lots of people who have had this go on to have more children. Um, they do advise that, if you're at a high risk or you've had it before, um, that you should be preparing for this during pregnancy. Um, you should be seen by a perinatal psychiatrist. You should be having a pre-birth planning meeting, with your partner, your support systems. If you've got, a therapist or a midwife or an obstetrician, the people that are going to be keeping tabs on you postpartum, you want to make sure that everybody's on the same page with a plan of care. Um, and make sure that everybody understands, okay, if this is, if this starts happening, or if we notice these things, this is what we're going to be doing. And they also advise you get a written copy of that care plan, um, so that you don't have your support system trying to figure out what they're going to
Mm,
do.
yeah.
We know exactly how to approach this. um, there's obviously been some very high profile cases. In 2001, Andrea Yates, I think she was in Texas,
Yeah.
um,
It was
confessed.
Waco because it was like a whole thing about Waco.
Oh, really?
I believe so. Yeah.
Hmm. She confessed to drowning her 5 young children in the bathtub. Oh, Houston.
Mm.
Um, she was 37 at the time, 5 young children, and they were like pretty close in age. I thought I had it in here.
I mean, I think the
Maybe
oldest
not.
was maybe like 6,
Yeah.
6 or 7. I mean, they were pretty yeah, she was
That's like one right after the
yeah.
next. And she suffered from severe postpartum depression, postpartum psychosis, and schizophrenia. So she waited for her husband to go to work. When he was gone, she began to act on these thoughts. Um, and then after she did it, called 911 repeatedly, called her husband and told him to come home. She initially was charged with 5 counts of capital murder. Um, and that was a really high profile case,
Yes.
um, and trial when that was on. Um, they convicted her in 2002 and sentenced her to life in prison. But her attorney successfully appealed and the verdict was overturned. Um, and then in 2006, they found her not guilty by reason of insanity.
Mm.
So she, since 2007, has been at a mental health facility in Texas.
Ugh.
Um, so they
Good
remanded
luck.
her there for yeah. Remanded her there for 15 years, but they allow her every year to undergo a review to see if she's competent to leave the facility. And she has actually waived that right every year.
Mm.
She's actually never undergone the review and chooses to continue treatment. Um, and her attorney said that she's happy where she is, she's where she wants to be, and where she needs to be. So I thought it was really interesting that because I just feel like 2001, I mean, this is
Well,
something that we're still learning about. So
yeah.
the I just remember the attitude being that she was just like the most evil woman.
Yes. That's what I
Um,
remember as well. But then
right.
I think
That podcast did a thing on it and I haven't heard it yet.
you're wrong about.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think I listened to that episode or like part of it maybe.
Mhm.
Um, but my understanding is that like her husband wasn't supposed to be leaving her at home, like wasn't supposed to be leaving her alone and did.
Did he work for
And
NASA? Am I making that up?
I don't know.
I might be
But
making that up. Don't listen to me.
my understanding is like they knew that she had all of these things and was struggling and was overwhelmed with 5 children. And the youngest was like a few months old, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, she was,
Um,
like, pretty newly postpartum.
like, she had just gotten out of the hospital. Like, it was like, they knew she was dealing with this. She had just gotten out of the hospital. He was not supposed like, the whole thing of her getting out of the hospital was that she was not going to be left alone, and then he immediately left her alone, and this immediately happened.
That's what you get
And
from a man named Rusty.
that's his name?
His name is Rusty.
Fucking Texas, man.
Yeah,
But, um, yeah, so it's the sort of thing where, like, I didn't know his name, and not that
yeah.
he got off scot-free, his children are dead, and I'm not saying
No, but he divorced and remarried.
yeah,
Yeah,
and which I mean, again, I understand the divorce too, like, I wouldn't
yeah,
probably stay with my partner if they hurt my children, but, um, it's just the kind of thing where it's like, you knew that she wasn't okay, and
yeah,
it's like you when you set people up to fail, what do you and then
yes.
they fail, and you're mad that they failed, and it's like,
Everybody
well,
failed her. Like,
that's just it.
I mean, you're you're taking this woman and you're putting her in this house and, for lack of better phrasing, cranking her full of kids.
Oh, I
Like,
mean, it was basically like a breeding fetish, I
yeah,
swear.
I mean, like,
Like, what are you doing if
5
not
kids back to
yeah,
back.
that's insane.
She
Read
barely
a
has
book.
time to
Do
I
something
mean,
else with your evenings.
if the if those kids are, like, a year apart, she's practically just been medically cleared to have sex again, and you're getting her pregnant again.
Yes.
So, I mean, we've talked about those hormonal changes.
Mhm.
I That would drive how many people
Yes.
to a mental health crisis, having all of those pregnancies back to back, and then being home alone with all of those fucking kids.
Yeah.
You'd be taking care of 3 toddlers and an infant.
I mean, look at Michelle Duggar. You can't tell me that that person is mentally stable. She talks like this all the time. Mother's on pills.
And
Like,
she's got a tribe of older kids to take care of the younger kids. Andrea Yates had all of these kids that were little.
mhm.
So she was not at the point where she could parentify any older kids to take care of the younger ones.
Yeah.
She was taking care of all those kids herself. So yeah, it's you think about it now and like it's just so heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And there was a case recently which has now brought this Andrea Yates story, people are talking about it a lot again. Lindsay Clancy, who was a midwife in Massachusetts,
Mhm.
um, she was 32. She had a
Well, she is
5-year-old,
32. She's not dead.
correct, is 32. Sorry about that. Um, she had a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 7-month-old, and is currently facing multiple charges of murder, strangulation, and assault for strangling these children, and then attempted suicide after she did that. So you
Yes.
think about how bad postpartum has to be acting. I mean, A, to be acting on it, B, to be acting on it against your children and yourself.
Mhm.
Um, she did attempt to jump out of a window in her home. Um, And I mean, this is somebody who works in like the birthing world.
Yes.
She was also a nurse. So like you've got this nurse midwife or a labor and delivery nurse midwife who is also falling victim to this. Who's going to be more in tune with postpartum things than someone who works in that sphere and has spent the last 5 years really postpartum because she had 3 children, like, pretty much back to back, 5, 3, and a baby. Um, it takes you, like, 2 years to recover from a pregnancy, so no sooner is she recovering, she's having another baby.
Well, not
Um,
only that, but, like so not only was she working in this sphere, but and was aware of these issues and likely had patients that dealt with,
Pitfalls, yeah.
things like this, but she had access to care and
Yeah,
access to resources that a lot of us don't have,
yes.
and I think that's
That
the
Andrea Yates for sure did not have.
absolutely not, and
Yeah,
so I think that's an important part of this newer case is that, she did have access, it's sort of
yeah,
like, um y not an excuse for, Andrea Yates, but a, it's understandable that she wouldn't know what her options were or that her partner, her
Yeah.
husband, as shitty as he was for leaving her, wouldn't have understood how extreme the risk was. But, you know, I'm sorry, what's the new girl's name?
Lindsay Clancy.
Lindsay worked in this area, worked in this field and had gotten help, right?
Yeah.
Like she had been admitted and
She was medicated.
yeah, and they had
Um,
tried like several different
yeah.
cocktails of medications to like manage her symptoms.
Yeah.
Um and so had all of that and still um couldn't keep a grip on reality.
And had a spouse, I was reading, there was like a quote from her husband, who there was so much compassion in it, and he was like, knowing, cuz I think she's also now um in a wheelchair because she had
Yes,
like
she's paralyzed
yeah, she had a
from
spinal
her
injury.
attempt. Yeah.
Um and he said something about like, I just hope like one day she's able to find peace. Because I mean, you think about that. So
Yeah.
you have this psychosis, which is hard to catch, is rare, and is so intense. Like it just seems like a wildfire. Like you get it, and it is sudden, and it's intense, and it's bad really quickly. And when you get to the point where it's devolved to acting on it, um imagine, coming out of that and stabilizing.
Right.
And now not only like are you living with the consequences of what happened, but you physically are living with the consequences of what happened.
Yeah.
Um and your life is permanently physically altered in that kind of way. I mean, I think I would have to be inpatient like Andrea
Yeah.
Yates for like the rest of my days, because
'Cause
living
it's
with
that
that would
yeah,
be,
exactly.
that's just it's just so much. So it's just like a really kind of heartbreaking. You see these people that are falling victim to this, and you just feel like so many things failed them for them to get to that point, for this to happen. It either wasn't caught, or they couldn't figure out the right way to treat it, or they didn't have the support systems they needed. Um,
So is this, like, something, though, that's identified by, like, your OB and your follow-up appointments or something? Like
they a lot of what I read, they were talking about the importance of your support system, like your people that are with you all the time, being able to recognize it.
so do they cover this in, like, parenting classes or whatever?
I knew nothing about it until I Googled it to do this episode.
Well, maybe they should start doing that because that would
Yeah.
be helpful.
I mean, they do talk
I
about
wouldn't have
postpartum
known to
depression. But this just seems to be, I mean, obviously this is scarier because it's psychosis, but I do feel like, we are way more aware of postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety now. And I
yeah.
mean, maybe this is just like as time goes on, we'll become, as they learn more about it, which it doesn't really seem like anybody's in a rush to do.
Well, like, trying to imagine, um, like, what it would take to get PK to call the cops on me.
Right.
If I was and I would have to probably be hallucinating and then doing something super reckless, like running with knives, or he's in the bedroom with the baby with the door barricaded, and I'm trying to get into the room, like stabbing at the door or something. Like, it would have to be so extreme for him to call the police,
Right.
whereas, obviously, that is an extreme, you know, outcome of this diagnosis, but it doesn't sound like that's where it starts.
I mean, all I could
So
think is like, I mean, if you're at the point where you're hallucinating, even if that was one of your only symptoms,
right.
you're not aware that
Well,
you're
that's just it,
hallucinating
like
necessarily.
and so,
So,
like, whatever I'm doing to react to those hallucinations would have to be so overt for
Oh, yeah.
not not that, like, PK doesn't pay any attention to me, but for him to be like, "Alright, like, why don't you go take a nap? You seem sleepy."
Well, and
You
I mean,
know,
think it
and
like sleep deprivation, like, if you said
right.
something that didn't make sense, I might be like, "Okay, I think you need to catch up on some sleep. How about I take the baby for a bit and you go get
Yeah.
some rest?" Um, you know, it I can totally see how people could fall prey to this because it I mean, I would not want to be vocal about these symptoms,
No.
you
Oh,
know?
absolutely. You know, I think I would probably feel very confused as somebody who hasn't experienced hallucinations before.
Yeah.
Um, I if I started seeing things, I think my first thought would be like, "Wow, I am tired."
Yep.
And so
Or
I
hearing
would
things.
yeah, like, it would be or even that thing, like, how many times even have you kind of like, "Oh my god, I have to check the baby." And it's like,
Mhm.
nothing's going on.
Yep.
Like, even last night, like, you were waiting to hear something.
Yeah.
So, like, you're just if you're at that point with your postpartum anxiety where you're like, "Okay, are they sleeping? Aren't they sleeping? Was that the dog moving?
Mhm.
What was that? Was that a sigh because they can't catch their breath? Like, did they whatever?" Any number of things
Yep.
that when you're sleep deprived and worried run through your head. But then, you have these moments where it's like these pretty innocuous things where it's like, "Oh, I just thought I saw something out of the corner of my eye." I have 3
Yes.
cats and a dog, okay?
Yes.
I almost always have something going on in the corner of my eye.
Yes.
Whether I like it could be a fuzzy tumbleweed going across the floor because I
Doesn't
need to
even
vacuum.
matter.
Right, so, like,
Yep.
it could be so easy to miss as the one that it's happening to, like, miss the, like, early hallucinations
Oh my god, like,
that
yeah, auditory hallucinations. I'm having a hallucination, I'm hearing a baby crying.
right.
How
Which
many
is
times have we
also
been recording where I'm like,
yeah.
"Oh, no, she's fine."
And I mean, I'll hear my neighbor's dog bark, and like I live in a densely packed neighborhood. I mean, it's not inner city, but it's not like rural.
Yeah.
And so it's the kind of thing where like, yeah, I can hear neighbors' kids sometimes. Like some of our windows are pretty old and they're not soundproof and like it is what it is. Like sometimes you just hear noises.
Yep.
So it it is concerning because it's that thing of well, it's concerning that they're not, like, mentioning it, like, "Hey,
Yeah, something
like,
to be
you
aware of.
need to" yeah,
I mean, I guess, like, they probably now that I'm thinking about it, like, so you do a lot of the postpartum screenings,
Mhm,
where they're, making sure that, like and again, when we did that postpartum episode on postpartum depression, and I was like, "Oh, are you feeling like this? Of course you're feeling like this." You know, I can just see, like, it's a period of time where a lot of things are explained away.
mhm,
Like, how
yeah,
many times do we see one of those funny videos where it's like, "Oh, is your leg falling off? That can happen when you're pregnant." Like, literally, you could be like, "Hey, my one eye fell out of its socket. Is that normal?" They'll be like, "That does happen sometimes when you're pregnant."
yeah, you
So,
took birth control, when you were a teenager, right? Yeah,
yeah,
so,
yeah. "Oh,
pretty
you
normal.
you blink? Yeah,
Mm,
that'll get you every time." Um,
should've
so
should've been using our blink stoppers
yeah,
from Pfizer.
hold your eyes right open.
Watch
Blink
the
stoppers.
horrors as they pass.
Yeah. Have you ever seen A Clockwork Orange? It's just like that. Um, so yeah, I can just see 1,001 ways that this can get overlooked, and I know that
Yeah,
I would be afraid of saying something because I wouldn't want the whole process to get away from me. Like, have you ever had something going on and it's that thought of, "Do I need to go to the emergency room?"
yes.
Okay. And you're like, "What?" You're, like, weighing it. "Okay, so if I go to
Yep.
the emergency room, how long am I gonna be there? What tests are they gonna be running?" Like
it's been so for me, that moment was like, well, if it's nothing, then I'm wasting their time.
Right.
Not so much that I'm wasting my time. So, like, I ended up going to urgent care the following day, but, like, I absolutely should have gone and gotten a head CT. Like, there was no reason to not,
Right.
considering what I had been through, but it was that like, I had that thought, which is just, like, 3 different levels of fucked up, but, like,
Right. Right. Right.
it's that kind of and also, although to be fair, I think knowing about postpartum psychosis would make me less worried about saying something. I think if I didn't know it was a thing is when I would talk myself out of saying something,
Oh yeah, I definitely think
you
like
know?
I think it needs to be kind of discussed in appointments more. Like as
Yeah.
you're approaching birth, okay, you know, I know that you have a lot on your plate right now, but you need to have some things on your radar. Because it's kind of like preeclampsia. It can go bad real fast and it's a
Yeah.
very changeable time. But I know like I would definitely be afraid. Are they gonna take my baby away from me?
That would
Am I
definitely be a fear, and, I mean, I think that that's probably something that your provider should be talking to you about, like, "Hey, if this happens, you're not gonna lose custody of your baby. We're
that
not
would
gonna
be
take
and
your
that would
kid from
be
you."
because I also feel like once something triggers you having an interaction with something like, you know, CPS or um, you know, when there's like a mental health concern, I think it's kind of like we were talking about with the oppositional defiance disorder, like it can be hard to get out of
Yeah.
that realm, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? So my fear is like, okay, am I now signing myself up for a decade of having to prove myself to be stable?
Right.
And
Yeah.
it's kind of like the, you know, like you, what is it? Thou doth protest too much. Like if I really try and convince them that I'm stable, is it just going to make me look less stable?
Mhm.
By trying to prove myself and be really emphatic about like, "No, like, I'm fine. Everything's okay. I can do this on my own." So, yeah, I think that there's just, like, the internalized stigmas that you have, the fear of the unknown, um, and the fact that it's just not really talked about a ton, and when you do
Yeah.
see it, it's these really extreme cases in the news.
Yeah.
I think that creates barriers to people getting help.
Totally.
And I just think I started reading about it and I was like, man, this is so sad. It's so scary. Um, and just like what a really at a time that's already scary and overwhelming, like what a
Mhm.
hard thing to have to also overcome when really just like just going through this period of time with no complications is already hard.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for the upbeat topic this week.
Sorry, guys.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oppositional defiant made us angry, and this just makes us sad.
Sad, yeah. Um, yeah, the
But
seasonal
important to
depression.
cover, so thank
It
you.
is, yeah, it is. I and that's what that was one of those things, like, I felt like it needed its own episode. I felt like it was gonna be upsetting, but I also felt like after starting to research it and read about it, I was like, "Wow, this is something that is not being openly discussed enough, like, in a factual way, not like in a, like, I don't wanna say mainstream media, but not like in like a news where they're
Right.
talking about a story like this where it's so sensationalized, and I mean, Andrea Yates, everybody failed her and she was crucified,
Yes.
absolutely crucified in the media. Um,
I
when
mean,
in reality,
she's a trope.
yes,
Like, she
she's like
I
the butt of
mean,
a joke.
yeah.
What's the other one? Lorena
Jody
Bobbitt.
Arias. Oh, yeah.
Same thing.
Yep.
Like everybody likes making jokes, and then you read about the story and you're like, oh, she was horribly abused and
Yes.
snapped. And this guy's a gigantic piece of
Right, like,
garbage.
oh, he raped her every night?
Yeah.
Ah, I get it now. Yeah,
Gee,
that makes sense.
I wonder why she cut
And
off
cheated
his
on her,
penis.
and
Right. I mean, subjected her to just torment for how many years?
right.
So yeah, it's just one of those like it's just really I think it is worth talking about because you do see these people who, I mean, maybe if in another universe, Andrea Yates didn't have 5 kids back to back and she had a couple of kids a few years apart and recovered just fine and continued along her life,
Mhm.
without something like this happening, or, lived 20 years later and, something was caught or she had a really good OB that caught it or,
Yeah.
I just think it's a good conversation to have, but I'm sorry that it is so upsetting.
Yeah.
I hope everybody's seasonal depression's going well.
I mean, the sun is out today as we're recording, and it was out yesterday too,
Yes.
which is, like, amazing because we were going on, like, 2.5 full weeks with no direct sunlight. Like,
Yeah, it was
there
real
were no
gray.
shadows to be seen.
None.
It was just
You didn't
so
even have to,
gray.
like, bother opening your curtains every day because it was just, like, gray outside.
Yeah. And, I actually said to my therapist last Wednesday, I was like, "I feel like this is the time of year I struggle with and why, like, when the solstice happens, I'm like, yeah, whatever,' because I know
There's
the
so much
gray
more
is
way to go.
coming."
Yeah.
Like, if it was gray in the beginning of December and then solstice happened and it started having more sun, then I would feel better about it. But I was like,
Nope.
I'm just, like, exhausted
Yep.
because I just haven't seen the sun.
Yeah.
Like, and I don't spend time in the sun, generally speaking, unless it's summer, but I just need it, like, for my eyes.
Yeah.
So, plus I got those new prescription sunglasses and I was like, "These are useless now." And
Yeah.
so, um, yeah, so it's just been it's so nice to see the sun. It is fucking cold out though.
It is
It's
like
very
yesterday,
cold.
we ran a couple errands yesterday and I was like, "Wow, it is deceptively cold outside." Like,
Yes.
by all appearances, it looked warm,
Yes.
and then you went outside and the wind blew and you're like, "Oh, fuck, it's really cold outside."
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I think, just the sun being out, I've been able to, like, sit
Yes.
inside,
I
but
can do like a
feel
cat.
this. Yes, and I can recharge, and it makes me feel so good. It is just, like it's so nice to just have, like, a little taste of spring.
Yes.
Um,
It gives me that, like, extra oomph to, like, want
yes.
to clean and, like, do the things like, "Oh, I guess I will clean the dog's nose boops off the window because now I give a shit that I can look outside the window."
Yes. So I will say, because this is a time of year usually, like, mid-January to when the time changes in March, I'm usually really struggling, but because I've been able to get the baby into her room, get my bedroom back together, clean the house, like put stuff away. She's also
Yeah.
like aged out of some stuff. So stuff is just getting like boxed up and put in storage. And my house feels a little bit better. And now I have that shark robot that cleans my floors every night, whose
Oh,
name
you
is
mapped it?
Sharkira. Yes, we did.
Sharkira.
We mapped it.
I love it.
And
We named my
she,
mom's Phoebe after our dog that we had growing up because she would eat all of the food off the floor that we
that's a good
dropped.
idea. That's really good. Um, and I just like I'm getting that feeling like, okay, I'm not
Yes.
drowning in laundry and dust, and I've been like dusting stuff, and it is like, even if it's cold, like the other day it was cold, but I opened the windows for a little bit just to like get some
That fresh
stale
air
air
is
out.
so nice.
Yes. So
Yeah.
here's your reminder to um get fresh air when you can because this time of year it is hard. And get sunlight and recharge when you can.
Yeah. And, you know, because we all have ADHD here, if you have a moment of inspiration to clean and tidy something up, grab it, keep your sneakers
Yes.
on, and don't
Yes.
sit down.
No, that was me, like, last night, it was, like, 9 o'clock at night, and I'm, like, vacuuming the bedroom, and my
Mhm.
spouse comes in like, "What do you" I was like, I have to ride this wave. I
It's
never get
that
time to do it, and I
those
wanna do it."
reels of, like, POV, you're married to somebody with ADHD, and they say that they're tired and going to bed, and you stay up a little bit later, and then you go upstairs, and they're peeling the wallpaper down. Yeah.
Yeah. That's, literally last night, I was like, "Well, we should go to bed early because we don't know how much he's gonna be up tonight, blah, 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 blah,
Mhm.
blah." So he went up at like not even 10:30, and I
Mhm.
didn't go to bed until midnight because I was just
I was up much later. Like,
doing.
usually I go up to bed around 8:30 and I'm, like, awake until, like, 9:30 just, like, fucking around on my phone because I don't
Mhm.
care what your sleep episodes told me to do.
Eat a
And
dick, Harvard, in case you forgot. I love Katie's doubling down a year later, just like, fuck you,
I didn't
Harvard.
forget. You're still on my shit list. School of Public Health, my ass. Uh,
Think I give a fuck about your sleep studies?
but no, I was up until about 10 last night and like was still scrolling my phone for a little bit when I was in bed. But yeah, usually PK will stay up much later than me. And lately he hasn't been either. So I know that we're both like I said to him before the sun came out yesterday, I was like, we might need to actually start using the therapy lamp. Like, we're both
I
struggling here.
I'm also at a point where like I want to start exercising. Like I've been doing the PT. I'm starting to feel
Hmm.
a little bit more stable. I'm like, and I'm getting like more motivated to want to exercise, which is hard because there's no fucking energy.
Yeah.
Because anytime you have free hands and energy, you're like, well, I have to do 800 loads of laundry and fold it and put it away and
Yeah.
clean things or tidy for the 400th time today. So it has been a struggle for sure with this light. With the sunlight not being available at all, and behind like a very thick layer of clouds all the time. So I'm feeling a little bit more like myself. I'm like, man, if I could walk,
Yeah.
oh my god. And now because we've had this unseasonably warm, rainy weather, there's no snowpack, so I can go out and
Yes.
walk and I can take the baby out for walks. So yeah, I'm like I'm pretty pumped,
Yeah.
to say the least. Ready for spring for sure.
So, uh, in the meantime, check in on your postpartum friends and keep your sneakers on while the sun is out
Yeah.
because the bar is ankle high.
Do we need to do anything else about follow us on?
Yep. Um, just kidding. We're back. Make sure you're following.
That expression on your face. Yep.
Make sure you're following us on Instagram and Threads at the bar is ankle high. We're also on TikTok at ankle high pod. We have merch at bit.ly/ankle high merch. And of course, check out our new unpaid intern merch. Leave us a 5-star review wherever you can, but especially on Apple Podcasts, because writing out the review really helps us, helps Apple realize that like we're super cool and people should listen to us more.
Yeah.
So it's really important. If you've just done the 5 stars before, you can go back and edit your review and like actually write out a review. So that would be really helpful. But anywhere you can leave a review for us is also very helpful, even if you can't write one out. And join our Patreon if you want extended episodes, ad-free episodes, and video episodes, by going to patreon.com/thebarisAnkleHigh.
Yeah. And check in on your postpartum friends. And don't take your sneakers off while the sun is shining.
Right.
Is that what it was?
Because, yes.
Okay. And open your windows and get fresh air.
Because the bar is ankle high.
Bye.
Nailed it.
That look on your face was so good.